So podcast listeners, silencing dissent. So if you think it's bad enough that AOC wants a ministry of truth, Chris Wallace interviewed just recently Tim Cook. Tim Cook is the CEO of Apple. And Tim Cook is talking to Chris Wallace about what they did with respect to banning Parler from their platform. And it's really kind of interesting. We have a series of clips on this. You really should listen to them. It's worth listening to. It's kind of fantastic to listen to because it really gets at the center of this private company, this mammoth private company, censoring the debate. And Tim Cook says big tech isn't monolithic. So first up, here's that clip. Listen to it.
Big tech is not monolithic. You know, there's several companies, they do different things. For us, we're always trying to do the right thing.
Cook decided the right thing for Apple was to suspend the conservative-leaning social media platform Parler from its App Store due to some users' violent posts.
So that's Chris Wallace saying that Tim Cook is the power player of the week. And if you know anything about Chris Wallace, of course, he does this every single week. He has a power player of the week. And Tim Cook is that power player. Fair enough. I mean, he runs a company with a $1 trillion plus market capitalization. It's a behemoth of a company, right? No doubt about that. But Tim Cook says big tech isn't monolithic. So here's Chris Wallace asking Cook about restricting speech. And we're going to go into this in some detail. And it's kind of interesting, not just what Chris Wallace asks, but what he doesn't ask in this entire interview. And we have that clip in. Here it is.
Isn't big tech restricting speech?
We have an app store that has about 2 million apps in it. And we have terms of service for these apps. We obviously don't control what's on the internet. But we've never viewed that our platform should be a simple replication of the internet. We have rules and regulations, and we just ask that people abide by those.
So that's Cook saying, look, we have terms of service and we have rules and regulations, and you have to follow them. And if you don't follow them, we can deplatform you. And he also said that he did not deplatform Parler permanently. They're not permanently banned. What Tim Cook is saying is they have been suspended. So they've been suspended. They must negotiate with Apple to get back in their good graces so that they can, talk about the correct kind of speech. There's only one kind of speech that Apple really wants to allow. And nonetheless, it is indeed a fact that Apple is a private company and they do have the right to have a terms of service and to enforce those terms of service. That is true, podcast listeners. But what about free speech, right? What about that whole idea of free speech when you have such a mammoth company with so much clout that they kind of are a de facto utility? And we've talked about that kind of de facto utility before. So what is utility? Well, think of the electric company, right? You have an electric company. How many choices do you have for your electric company? Probably one, right? Probably just one choice, because you don't want 10 different electric companies running 10 different kinds of telephone poles and lines to all these different houses. It would be a complete disaster. There's one electric company and they are utility and they are rightly regulated, because if they weren't, they could charge you whatever they wanted to charge you for electricity. Well, now we have Apple. Apple is this massive company, and Apple pretty much controls a great deal of how you can get on various platforms, right? It's very easy to go on your iPhone and to choose one of, the apps on your iPhone and go somewhere. You go in that direction, whatever particular app you want to choose. Well, what if the Parler app isn't there? Now where do you go, right? In theory, you go to Parler's website. Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. So what about free speech? Well, we have that clip as well with Cook, and here it is.
How did you decide to balance free speech with objectionable content?
We looked at the incitement to violence that was on there. And we don't consider that free speech and incitement to violence has an intersection.
What about the argument that by taking Parler off Apple, in addition to what other companies are doing, that you're just driving these people, these views further underground?
Well, we've only suspended them, Chris. And so if they get their moderation together, they would be back on there.
So look, there's no doubt that, of course, there are people who are on Parler and people on Facebook and Twitter who incite violence, right? And there should be someone to make sure that that kind of incitement is at least looked at very closely. Okay, so we have to be careful about this, right? Because then we have to argue over, well, what is actual incitement? Well, it's fair to say that incitement would be, hey, everybody go to the Capitol and storm it and break in and, tear Nancy Pelosi's office apart, steal her laptop, and if we have to kill a couple policemen on the way inside the Capitol, then let's do it. If someone were to say that, clearly that is incitement to violence. Let's all agree with that, right? But here we have this massive $1 trillion company deciding what is incitement. And so I'm sure that conversation is happening in the back channels now between the CEO of Parler and Tim Cook's people as to, well, okay, so what is acceptable by Apple? What is Apple considered to be acceptable? And just so the podcast listeners understand, so this doesn't come back to haunt us here at Mark and the Millennials, we don't think that incitement of violence is a good idea either, okay? Obviously, really, we don't, okay? So don't come back and say, oh, Mark Fisher said blah, blah, blah. No, we didn't say that. What we're saying is that there are clear issues of incitement, but then you have these large companies deciding what is and what isn't inciting violence. And so here's my question. Why didn't Chris Wallace ask Tim Cook the simple question, well, what about collusion with Apple, right? I mean, we have Amazon, who has large server farms, right? These are the farms that, if you will, they're inside of massive warehouses, and they store all of the data, not all of the data, but much of the data that is stored in the United States that you call up when you go online, it's stored on Amazon servers. Well, guess who had stored their data on Amazon servers? Parler did. And so Amazon, of course, deplatformed, if you will, and kicked Parler off of their servers. And then Google, of course, did the same thing, with Android, with the Android device. So now you can't go and with the Android device, you cannot have that as an alternative phone to an iPhone and go on it and do what? You can't go have an app for Parler on the Android. So you also, I think also, Parler was deplatformed from their website because of the same thing, right? Because obviously the website data is stored somewhere in some cloud, in some place, and that was Amazon as well. So Parler is gone, right? It's like Parler didn't ever even exist. Yet all of these huge mega tech companies did they banned Parler at the same time. So isn't that collusion? That's my question. Isn't that collusion? So here's where we're going with this. Why didn't Chris Wallace ask the question to Tim Cook? Isn't it collusion, Tim Cook, that you and Amazon and Google happened to deplatform Parler all at the same time? Isn't that collusion? But he didn't ask the question. And this is what drives me crazy, because there are always these soft interviews. How often do you get Tim Cook in a studio or on Zoom, same difference, in an interview where you have an opportunity at this critical time in American history to ask the difficult questions about deplatforming and free speech and what is considered incitement and who's policing it and who decides? All these are good questions. But of course, you can always count on Chris Wallace never asking the tough questions like collusion, because then that would get the Justice Department involved, because the whole purpose of collusion by Tim Cook and by Amazon, Jeff Bezos, and Google and so forth is to gang up together to stop any kind of competition whatsoever. Same thing with Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, we didn't name Mark Zuckerberg here, but we might as well. And speaking of which, what did Zuckerberg do? What's my understanding that Zuckerberg's Facebook is working with Turkey to decide what is or isn't acceptable in the country of Turkey in terms of speech on their platform. So it's the government colluding with Facebook and deciding what is or isn't acceptable. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the problem, right? Because on the left, they're saying, oh, these are private companies. They can police their platforms any way they want. Yeah, but they can't collude. Okay? You know what else they can't do? They can't be in partnership with the United States government. They can't be in partnership with the United States government to stop any kind of speech they want because they're doing business with the government. And yet Facebook has shown us that they have a model where they're actually doing that, and they're doing it in Turkey. And so that's silencing dissent.